Good morning. I'm a little late, but it's still beautiful. Thank you for being with me. Chapter 22, The Melting Pot, a Failure, ? Every national tenet needs its stentorian voice, and for well over half a century, the Saturday Evening Post spoke for American anti-immigrant racism. Founded in 1821, it was by the 1920s, with more than 2 million subscribers, the nation's most popular periodical, as well as an excellent platform for a well-illustrated, cold-hearted, nativist campaign against immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe. Declaring immigration restriction a matter of life and death for the American people. The Post editor, George H. Lorimer, from 1868 to 1937, so powerfully shaped public opinion that his magazine influenced American lawmakers, all too eager to assuage panicky constituents. The House Committee on Immigration heard Lorimer's Saturday Evening Post editorial of the 7th of February 1920 read aloud. The matter of race must be given more attention. ... These alien peoples are temperamentally and racially unfitted for easy assimilation. ... The rank and file of these unassimilated aliens still live mentally in the ghetto. ... In thought, they are still stoned by the Gentile. ... They are serfs, so tradition, narrow, suspicious, timid, brutal, rapacious. ... The races in question, of course, were white. All right, I'm going to read this again. I'm going to leave the dots out and see if it makes more sense for me. All right, February 7th, the editorial from 1920 was read aloud. The matter of race must be given more attention. These alien peoples are temperamentally and racially unfitted for easy assimilation. The rank and file of these unassimilated aliens still live mentally in the ghetto. In thought, they are still stoned by the Gentile. They are serfs to tradition, narrow, suspicious, timid, brutal, rapacious. The races in question, of course, were white. All right, I did it. Woohoo! Okay, part of Lorimer's genius was his ability to blend his message with a great gift for recruiting talented writers and artists. In 1916, for instance, he hired a green, young painter on the strength of 2 covers painted on spec. Norman Rockwell subsequently painted Post covers for 45 years. And although Lorimer's personal politics leaned far to the right, he did not hesitate to employ writers like Sinclair Lewis, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Theodore Dreiser, Jack London, and Stephen Crane, who stood more to his left. But Lorimer did make sure that one man bigger than all the foregoing agreed with him right down to the line. Kenneth L. Roberts, born 1885, lived through 1957. He harbored a great distaste for Southern and Eastern Europeans, especially Jews, and an abhorrence for racial mongrelization. Both Roberts and Lorimer believed that immigration would extinguish the race of native white Americans because races cannot be crossbred without mongrelization any more than dogs. A proud Maine Yankee, whose ancestors, he claimed loudly, came to Maine in 1639. Roberts graduated from Cornell University in 1908. During the First World War, he served in the U.S. Army Siberian Expeditionary Force. He joined the Saturday Evening Post staff in 1919 and quickly succeeded. In the first 7 months of 1919 alone, he earned $7,700 at a time when doctors and lawyers earned around $2,000 a year. Roberts stayed with the Post for 10 years before leaving in 1928 to write historical fiction, books that are still read and appreciated, especially by the listeners of North Country Radio in northern New York State and the guests on Garrison Keller's Prairie Home Companion cruises. Okay, we got a little side note. A summer 2004 North Country Radio reading list included Roberts' best-known novel, Northwest Passage. A list of suggested reading for the August 2005 Prairie Home Companion cruise recommends any of the historical novels of Kenneth Roberts. Therefore, the best portrait of Roberts appeared some 2 decades after his Post pieces on immigration. In 1940, on the occasion of the publication of his new novel, Oliver Weswell, Time magazine celebrated his best-selling novelist career with a cover story. I think it's some more color over here. Alright, hang on a second. I gotta make a small shift. And I'm getting some fight back. There we go. Come on, baby. Work with me. You okay, little dog? Okay? Our sweet puppy's here. Alright, I continue. We're on page 302. His Northwest Passage, written in 1937. A novel celebrating his ancestors in the French and Indian Wars, was made into a well-received 1940 movie. I'm going to read that again. His writing Northwest Passage from 1937, a novel celebrating his ancestors in the French and Indian Wars, was made into a well-received 1940s movie vehicle for Spencer Tracy. Universally popular, Roberts received honorary degrees from Colby, Dartmouth, Bowdoin, and Middlebury colleges, and shortly before his death in 1957, a special Pulitzer Prize citation for historical fiction. Time called him the finest U.S. historical novelist since James Fenimore Cooper. All right, let's see, what is that? Angry Man, romance, cover story, picture of... Here's our picture of Kenneth Roberts. Great. You know how this goes, my loves. Hang on. Here we go. First I'm gonna come out and try to show you a picture of her book without losing all the other pages. There he is. Delightful man. Surely. Okay. But our interest in Roberts lies in the context of the 1920s. Here comes that sun. Even friends admitted that Roberts was a difficult human being, among the most irascible men alive, whose conversation was profusely decorated with profanity. But at bottom, he, like his editor Lorimer and the Post cartoonist Herbert Johnson, detested anything having to do with progressive reform. Roberts came to hate the New Deal and its architect, Franklin D. Roosevelt, so much that he glued Roosevelt dimes to the clamshells he used as ashtrays, the better to grind ashes into FDR's face. Well, he's a sweet guy. Even Lorimer, no friend of immigrants or Jews, had to tone down Roberts' blatant racism before his articles could appear in the Post. In his books, Roberts speaks freely about damned half-Negro Italians, half-mongrel Jews, and thoroughly bastardized Greeks and Levantines. During the Great Unrest following the First World War, Lorimer asked Roberts to investigate post-war immigrants. The upshot in 1920-21 was Roberts' pungent, first-hand reports from Europe, eventually gathered from his Saturday Evening Post pieces into a 1922 volume called Why Europe Leaves Home. I feel like the wind is picking up. I don't just feel it, I hear it too. So I'm going to have to roll this wind up so that I can hear myself. Okay, and turn the radio off. Got a little chilly there. During the Great Unrest following the First World War, Lorimer asked Roberts to investigate post-war immigrants. The upshot in 1920-21 was Roberts' pungent, first-hand reports from Europe, eventually gathered from his Saturday Evening Post pieces in a 1922 volume called Why Europe Leaves Home. Immigration had reached crisis proportions. Roberts howled. It absolutely had to be stopped. Agreeing with his editor, Lorimer, 3 times in Lutley had to be stopped. Wait a minute. 3 times in one article. Okay, wait a minute. Agreeing with his editor, Lorimer, 3 times in one article, Roberts termed immigration restriction a matter of life and death for the American people. The threat was racial. Either the United States would break up into a series of racial groups, fighting, bickering, haggling over their alien racial differences, or worse, a new composite race of people wholly different from the Americans of the present day would emerge, a motley, inefficient, mongrelized race, having roamed far and wide on the Post's dime. Roberts described Czechs as backward, illiterate, dirty, thick-headed, and English working men as runty, stunted, malformed, buck-toothed, obviously malnourished, diseased, and generally wretched specimens. Southern Italians had descended from the mongrelized slaves of the Roman Empire because the American nation, like ancient Greece and Rome, grew out of blonde Nordic genius. Mongrelization would ruin the United States as surely as it ruined the ancients. And so it went. The intensity and widespread circulation of Robert's anti-Semitic venom merged into an ugly tide of hatred, pounding away at the Jews as mean-faced, shifty-eyed, and unassimilatable human parasites, a poisoned immigration from Europe, and the natural agents of Bolshevism. Robert's articles herald a deepening preoccupation with Jews in popular discourse. Anti-Semitism was already well established in the United States, but grew increasingly abusive in the early 20th century. Before the war, Jews had figured as only one in a list of inferior Europeans, along with Slavs and Italians. Now Jews moved to the top, personifying the menace of immigration and Bolshevism in racial terms. All right, we got a little side note here. A side note, in 1915, okay, there we go. Vigilante Georgians raided a prison. They kidnapped Leo Frank, an Atlanta Jewish businessman, and lynched him. That was over 100 years ago. This is 2025. That was 1915. I'm afraid to say ain't that much changed, in my opinion. One example of the stereotypes assigned to Jewish immigrants, often termed Hebrews, lay in the popular work of the Wisconsin professor Edward A. Ross. Deemed an expert on immigration since his 1901 lecture on race suicide, Ross repeated familiar stereotypes in his widely read and influential The Old World in the New, The Significance of Past and Present Immigration to the American People, from 1914. Jews are loud and pushy. They lie and cheat. Jewish men pursue Gentile rather than Jewish girls. Ross repeated the familiar orthodoxy of the time, that immigrants were lowering the level of American intelligence and American beauty. In a famous phrase echoing Shakespeare's The Tempest, Ross called new immigrants the Caliban type, who belongs in skins in wattled huts at the close of the Great Ice Age. These ox-like men are descendants of those who always stayed behind. Ross maintains, with many others at the time, that race purity produces beauty. As we know, William Z. Ripley had in 1908 also predicted that the crossing of heterogeneous strains would make ugly Americans. Ross foresees a good many phases of a chaotic constitution, the outcome of the blending of dissimilar European races. Whew. The most dissimilar for Ross are the Hebrews, polar opposites of our pioneer breed. Jews are undersized and weak-muscled, shrinking from outdoor activity and screaming at the slightest injury. They cannot be made into Boy Scouts, iconic symbols of hardy young manhood. Indeed, at the turn of the 20th century, the outdoors functioned as the symbolic Nordic setting, whereas inferior races were thought to inhabit the teeming city slums, where they could perpetually stay indoors. For Ross, Jewish shortcomings, however prominent, were not permanent or innate. Granted, it would take eons for Jews to turn into pioneer stock, he hinted, but that time might eventually arrive. Kenneth Roberts disagreed. To him, immigrant shortcomings were inborn and permanent, and he defined immigration in terms of race. Quotas should therefore severely limit the numbers of immigrants of certain races, never mind nationality. Like Carl C. Brigham in his writing A Study of American Intelligence, Roberts used the increasingly fashionable term Nordic to designate a superior race. In turn, Brigham's book leans on the authority of the prominent eugenist Madison Grant, who inserted the term Nordic into public discourse in his writing Passing of the Great Race. Roberts knew Madison Grant and his acolyte Lothrop Stoddard personally and echoed their warnings directly. In the writing Why Europe Leaves Home, Roberts quotes cities and recommends both Grant and Stoddard to make Grant's Nordic a household name. Obituaries of Madison Grant, born 1865, died 1937, remembered his quintessential patrician racist as a pioneering conservationist, which was true. His New England Puritan descent ever in evidence. Madison Grant considered American nature his patrimony, and in many ways it was. He saved various endangered species, ranging from California's redwood trees to American bison, and founded the Bronx Zoo, along with Theodore Roosevelt, his longtime correspondent, fellow outdoors enthusiast, and book blurber. Grant played an active role in the Boone and Crockett Club of wealthy New Yorkers interested in the early phases of conservation. Without this club, and Grant in particular, Glacier National Park, Everglades National Park, and Olympic National Park might not have come into being. Grant's education at Yale, his family's institution, enhanced by 4 years of study in Dresden, allowed him to read European anthropology in its original languages. Grant's fellow students in Dresden included the future Saturday Evening Post editor Horace Lorimer. Grant was an accomplished man, but his accomplishments led him in odd, even pernicious directions. His understanding, for instance, of animals and trees took Grant to the conservation of the races through eugenics and immigration restriction. As a prime hereditarian of the 1910 and 1920s, Grant exerted enormous influence at Cold Spring Harbor's eugenics record office. William Z. Ripley's Races of Europe lay at the foundation of Grant's science, and Grant did consider his work brutally, objectively scientific, even at the cost of rejecting fundamental American values. The introduction to his pessimistic masterwork, The Passing of the Great Race, 1916, 4th edition, 1921, warns, "This generation must completely repudiate the proud boast of our fathers that they acknowledged no distinction in race, creed, or color or else the Native American must turn the page of history and write Fine Americae. To Grant, the melting pot might have worked in the olden days of Nordic immigrants, who for Grant and Roberts now include the Catholic Irish. But the current surge of non-Nordic immigrants dooms the melting pot to absolute failure. No more melting pot and no more democratic human rights. The sentimentalists must be put down along with the alien races. Resolutely hereditarian. The passing of the great race writing combines the commonplace of degenerate family studies, Galtonian eugenics, race suicide, history, and polygenesis, which is the rejection of the idea of the same origin for people of all races. One remedy for race deterioration came from his eugenics colleague, Harry Latimer. One might grant muses, designate the... All right, it's a little written different, so it's going to sound different. One might grant muses, designate the least desirable, let us say 10% of the community, when this unemployed and unemployable human residuum has been eliminated together with the great mass of crime, poverty, alcoholism, and feeble-mindedness associated therewith, it would be easy to consider the advisability of further restricting the perpetuation of the then remaining least valuable types. By progressively eliminating inferior types, most vital and intellectual strains could finally be chosen to carry on the race. Grant and other eugenicists envisioned negative eugenics as the glorious future of evolution. If this sounds Nazi-like, it most certainly was, and Nazis in Germany took lessons from Grant. Grant, Ripley, and all the other Teutonists fetished height. Once again, the Sardinians are racially dwarfed, like the Polish Jews, whose dwarf stature, peculiar mentality, and ruthless concentration on self-interests are being engrafted upon the stalk of the nation. Perhaps, Grant admits, some peoples he includes among his Nordics may actually be short. To explain this departure from theory, he surmises that the natural height of the Irish, and even some English, may be lowered by the continued existence of a considerable population of primitive short stock. Primitive stock. Always being short and dark. His examples of the influence of primitive short stock on Nordics contrasts Englishmen of different races that happen to coincide with class difference. The Piccadilly gentleman of Nordic race and the Cockney costermonger of the old Neolithic type. Hair and eye color count, but skin color less so, in the writing The Passing of the Great Race, because skin color is unreliable. Pure Nordics have absolutely fair skin, making the Nordic the white man par excellence. But unfortunately, many real Nordics, even Scandinavians, may not be sufficiently pale. short Englishmen, swarthy Nordics, and poor whites in the U.S. South or London's East End all compromise Grant's tortured attempt at a coherent hereditary classification. Grant also rejects the notion of the Kentuckian as the quintessential Nordic American popularized by Theodore Roosevelt's professor, Nathaniel Southgate Shaler. No better than poor whites, whether crackers or the shiftless whites of Georgia, the Bahamas, the Barbados, Kentuckians lack even the excuse of living at low altitudes when high altitudes were thought to foster superior races. More befuddlement follows. Grant reckons that the Cumberland Mountains should favor men of the Nordic breed, but mountains of the South were notorious for producing degenerate families. Lacking an answer, Grant seems to shrug and walk away, concluding, "There are probably other hereditary forces at work there as yet little understood." All right, we got one page left. It has a picture on it, so it's kind of one page. Grant may have sunk into obscurity, but the biggest name in American letters, Theodore Roosevelt, loved the first edition of The Passing of the Great Race, going so far as to supply a blurb proclaiming it a capital book in purpose and vision, in grasp of the facts our people most need to realize. It shows a fine fearlessness in assailing the popular and mischievous sentimentalities, and attractive and corroding falsehoods which few men dare assail. It is the work of the American scholar and gentleman. Academic reviews were also largely positive, though criticism did arise from liberals and Jews, both easily brushed off because of their origins. Franz Boas grasped the danger of a spiteful, racist account coming from an author with sound scientific credentials. Credentials be damned. Boas condemned Grant's work as practically a modern edition of Gobineau, based on dogmatic assumptions. Boas recognized the fanciful nature of Grant's maps, which had dazzled most other reviewers. Young Horace Callan's negative review prompted Grant to dismiss it as the work of a Jew and just what he expected from the followers of Boas. So cavalier a dismissal sufficed to tamp down dissent during the heyday of the blonde, long-headed Nordic. The dolichocephalic, long-headed, light-haired dolicho blonde embodies Grant's ideal. Oh my God. A figure now practically forgotten, but one cutting quite a swath in the 1920s. According to Grant, Nordics have not only given the world civilization, enterprise, and bravery, they also possess heavenly beauty. The gods of lovely ancient Greece were, of course, blonde. In 1920, the same year, the best-selling revision of The Passing of the Great Race appeared. The American Society painter John Singer Sargent depicted ancient Greeks and their gods as quintessential dolichocephalic blondes in Apollo and the Muses, a mural in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Even Sargent's horses are blonde. I'll show you those pictures in a second. One paragraph left. Brightness of the day. Without equivocation, Grant maintains that no artist depicting the crucifixion hesitates to make the two thieves brunette in contrast to the blonde Savior. Perhaps because the great artist of the Renaissance, Dante, Raphael, Titan, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci, were all the Nordic type. The astonishing version of history in The Passing of the Great Race advances the then accepted explanation for the fall of Rome. It was because of the Dolicho blonde Roman I'm a word. I can read another language sometimes. Dolicho blonde Roman patricians committed race suicide by not having children, by marching off to war, and by leaving their slaves at home to breed freely. It was not for nothing that Grant and David Starr Jordan, Stanford University's president and a leading peace advocate, worked together on committees at the Eugenics Record Office. Jordan, for instance, deplored the war in Europe for wreaking unparalleled havoc in the best racial elements in each nation concerned, thereby exhausting the near future and entailing impoverishment, both physical and mental. All right. And that is the end of that. The wind blowing. I'm going to show you a picture. Okay, the first picture is this. Oh, sorry, friends. This guy. Can we see him? There he is. I know you wanted to know what he looked like. Oh, you feel like you've had the whole book together every time I saw it. And here's this picture here. And that last one is this one here. And again, it looks clear. Alright, that's the end of that. There's what book I'm reading you. Please remember to like and subscribe if you've just found me. I've been reading The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. Got a little blurry there. I have missed everyone. I'm glad to be back. I appreciate you.